There lived a king named Onyime. He was a pompous ruler who delighted in making his subjects suffer, and the villagers lived in constant fear of him. His stern face and piercing gaze seemed to bore into the souls of those who crossed his path, striking fear into their hearts. One of the most puzzling things about King Onyime was that he seemed ageless. Despite his many years on the throne, he looked as vigorous and strong as a man half his age. The villagers whispered amongst themselves about the king's remarkable youthfulness. There were silent rumors. His agelessness was a source of both fascination and terror for the villagers. The king had established a tradition where every newborn baby in the land had to be dipped in the village river for purification. The villagers were not comfortable with it, but no one dared to question the king's authority. The king also had taken many young girls as his wives, forcibly taking them from their families to become part of his harem. One of the girls was Mfon, a beautiful young woman who had been torn from her loving family. Mfon's parents had been devastated, and her father had even attempted to rescue her from the palace. However, the king's guards caught him and punished him severely. Mfon, like the other wives, was made to live in the palace and cater to the king's desire, and was forced to forget her old life. However, Mfon's spirit remained unbroken. She longed for freedom and revenge against the king who had destroyed her life. As she went about her daily duties, she secretly plotted her escape and the king's downfall. Mfon stayed in the palace for a while, trying to adjust to her new life as one of the king's wives. However, as she settled into her new routine, she began to notice a disturbing pattern. Many of the babies who underwent the purification ritual in the river did not survive beyond 1 year. At first, Mfon thought it was just a coincidence, but as the deaths continued to mount, she realized that something was terribly wrong. One night, after a purification ritual, Mfon saw the king drink the water that was fetched from the stream. She had been watching from a distance, curious about the ritual and its significance. But as she saw the king drink the water, she felt a chill run down her spine. He performed some incantations, his voice low and menacing, and it became clear to Mfon that the king was using the ritual to maintain his youthful appearance. Mfon was horrified by what she had seen. She realized that the king's obsession was a dark and sinister force that was driving him to commit these atrocities. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she thought about the babies who had died and the countless others who would suffer the same fate if the king was allowed to continue. Mfon knew she had to act fast, but she was trapped in the palace, surrounded by the king's guard and loyal subjects. She felt like a prisoner, unable to escape or speak out against the king's evil deeds. But she was determined to find a way, no matter the cost. She began to secretly gather information, talking to the other wives and servants, and looking for any clues that might help her bring the king to justice. But then, she found out she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mix of emotions, joy, fear, and anxiety, determined to protect her child from the king's sinister ritual. Months later, after she had put to bed, she knew that she couldn't escape from the palace, not with the king's guards standing around. So she decided to take a bold step to ensure her child's safety. Before the day of the purification ritual, she decided to secretly gather the other mothers who had given birth recently. Together, they hatched a plan to defy the king's orders and refuse to take part in the ritual. Mfon knew it was a risk, but she was determined to protect her child at all costs. She whispered instructions to the other mothers, urging them to stand firm and refuse to hand over their babies. As the day of the ritual approached, Mfon's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. She knew that the king would stop at nothing to enforce his will, and that she and the other mothers were taking a huge risk by defying him. But she also knew that she had to act for the sake of her child and the future of the village. On the day of the purification ritual, the mothers, led by Mfong, stood firm in their decision. They gathered at the riverbank, their babies clutched tightly in their arms, and refused to hand them over to the king's priests. The priests, dressed in their elaborate robes, looked on in confusion and anger as the mothers defied the king's orders. The king, enraged by their defiance, stormed down to the riverbank, his face twisted in fury. "How dare you disobey me?" he thundered, his voice echoing off the trees. "You will pay for your insolence." But the mothers stood their ground, refusing to back down. Mfong, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward to confront the king. "We will not let you harm our children," she declared, a voice steady and firm. "We will not let you continue this evil ritual." The king sneered at her, his eyes flashing with anger. "You are just a foolish woman. You do not know what is best for your child. I am the king, and I will not be disobeyed." But the mothers stood firm. They were ready to fight for their children's lives. Just as it seemed like the situation was about to escalate, one of the village elders stepped forward. He was an old man with a wise and weathered face, and he carried himself with a quiet authority. He revealed that he had discovered the king's dark secret many years ago, but had been too afraid to speak out. "I was just a young man when I stumbled upon the king's ritual," the elder explained. "I was out hunting in the forest when I saw the king and his priests gathered by the river, chanting and dancing, and the king was drinking from a cup made of human bone. I knew then that something was terribly wrong." The elder paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "I tried to forget what I had seen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something evil was lurking in our midst. And then, as the years went by, I began to notice a pattern. Every time a baby was born, the king would perform this ritual, and soon after, the baby would fall ill. I knew then that the king's ritual was the cause of our children's death." The villagers listened in stunned silence as the elder revealed the king's dark secrets. They had suspected that something was wrong, but they had never imagined that their king was capable of such evil. The elder's words sparked a wave of outrage and anger among the villagers. They turned on the king, demanding that he be punished for his crimes. The king, realizing that he was outnumbered, attempted to flee, but he was caught and brought back to the village. The villagers, led by Mfong and other mothers, banished the king from the village, forcing him to flee into the forest, where he grew old, wrinkled, and died within days. The dark ritual was finally brought to an end, and the village was finally free from the king's tyranny. Mfong and other mothers were hailed as heroes for their bravery. They had saved their children and broken the curse that had haunted the village for so long. From that day on, the village began to flourish. The villagers lived in peace and prosperity, free from the king's cruelty and oppression.